Russia thought the road was safe. That was the first mistake. The sky was quiet. That was the second mistake. The Ukrainian drones had disappeared for days. That was the trap. In mid-April, 18 Russian vehicles rolled into a narrow 4-kilometer corridor in eastern Ukraine. Tanks, BMPs, BTRs, supply trucks, fuel, ammunition, replacement infantry. The kind of convoy that does not just move men, it moves an entire offensive forward. 22 minutes later, none of it mattered. No vehicle got out, around 190 Russian soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, and the most frightening part for Moscow was not the wreckage burning on the road, it was the price tag. Ukraine spent roughly $1 to $1.5 million to destroy an estimated $24 to $40 million of Russian military value. That is not just a battlefield victory, that is financial warfare with propellers, batteries, mines, and patience. But this ambush was only one frame in a much larger movie. While Russian columns are dying on roads that look safe, Russian oil facilities are burning deep behind the line. Russian civilians are asking where their air defense went. Russian wives are begging Putin to save wounded husbands. And Europe is preparing a 90 billion euro lifeline for Kiev. Putin wanted Ukraine exhausted. Instead, Ukraine is becoming the most dangerous military laboratory on Earth. Russia has a very old problem. If you want to attack, you need to resupply. If you want to resupply, you need roads. If you need roads, you need to believe those roads are survivable. In eastern Ukraine, in mid-April, a Russian column was preparing to push fuel artillery shells, replacement infantry, and medical supplies toward the front line. There were two routes available. One was shorter but completely exposed open ground that Ukrainian artillery had already targeted multiple times. Russian commanders knew that the road was dangerous. The second route was longer, running along a tree line for roughly 3 kilometers before opening onto the final approach. It had seen less Ukrainian activity in recent weeks. It looked safer. Russia chose the longer route. The reasoning was entirely logical, and that logic was exactly why it died. Ukraine had been studying Russian movement patterns for days. They watched vehicles concentrate at the logistics point. They watched fuel being stockpiled. They watched infantry units move toward the staging area. Ukraine did not need to guess whether Russia would move. They only needed to know which road Russia would choose. This trap did not begin with an explosion. It began with silence. For weeks, Ukrainian drones had been flying regular reconnaissance patterns over that second route. Russian observers noticed. They tracked the rhythm. They logged the sortie schedules. And then 4 days before the Russian column departed, Ukraine began quietly pulling its drones out of the area. Not all at once. 1 less sortie per day, then 2 fewer, then nothing. To Russian intelligence watching Ukrainian surveillance patterns, this looked like Kiev had lost interest in this corridor. Maybe Ukraine was running low on drones. Maybe attention had shifted elsewhere. Maybe the road really was becoming safer. But in drone warfare, an absence is also a signal, and Ukraine had engineered that signal deliberately. At the same time, a Ukrainian forward observation post near the tree line was quietly relocated, moved 2 kilometers north to a position that still had full visibility of the road, but was far harder for Russian forces to detect. The withdrawal was timed to coincide with a period of bad weather, low cloud rain, poor visibility. Everything looked natural. Then came the most lethal part of the preparation. Ukrainian engineers spent 2 nights quietly mining the exit point of the corridor, the spot where the road emerged from the tree line onto the open final kilometer before the front. The mines were not placed to destroy vehicles immediately. They were placed to stop them, to seal the far end of the kill zone. A column that cannot exit, cannot escape. Artillery was pre-registered on 4 points along the 4-kilometer route, the entry point, 2 intermediate positions, and the mined exit. 12 FPV drone operators were staged with 60 fully charged aircraft targets already distributed, spacing already calculated based on standard Russian column doctrine. 2 anti-tank missile teams covered the first 300 meters of the corridor. A platoon of Ukrainian infantry occupied prepared positions on both flanks of the midpoint, ready to prevent survivors from escaping into the tree line on foot. 4 days of preparation, 22 minutes of execution. The Russian column commander had done everything right by the standards available to him. He had selected the safer route. He had confirmed Ukrainian drone activity in the sector was low. His vehicles carried exactly what the forward units needed. He drove his column into the corridor at dawn. Temperature 6 degrees, light fog in the tree line, quiet sky, nothing seemed wrong. Standard column spacing, roughly 50 meters between vehicles, stretched 18 vehicles across approximately 900 meters of road. The trigger was the last vehicle clearing the entry point. A Ukrainian observation drone at 2,000 meters altitude, invisible to the column below, confirmed it at 0614. The radio call reached the Ukrainian Fire Coordination Center. At 0615, 6 artillery shells landed simultaneously on the entry point, blocking the road behind the rearmost vehicles. Exit backward closed. At 0615 and 30 seconds, FPV drones launched from concealed positions on both flanks. The first wave struck within 45 seconds, hitting vehicles in the front third and rear third of the column simultaneously. 2 blockage points created inside the corridor itself. The middle vehicles caught between burning wrecks on both sides had nowhere to go. The lead tank, a T-80 BVM, absorbed 2 drone strikes in the first minute. The second penetrated the turret. The ammunition cooked off in a secondary explosion that destroyed the BMP immediately behind it. The column's head was gone. Anti-tank missile teams hit 3 more vehicles in the first 300 meters. In the first 60 seconds, 8 of 18 vehicles were destroyed or immobilized. Drone operators used thermal cameras that saw through the thickening smoke. The heat signatures of Russian soldiers running from burning vehicles were bright against the cool April air. Drones tracked them and struck. Soldiers who ran for the trees found Ukrainian infantry in prepared positions. Soldiers who ran forward found mines and anti-tank teams. Soldiers who ran backward found artillery craters and continued drone fire. The column commander's vehicle was hit at minute 4. The deputy commander took over and attempted to organize a breakout. His vehicle was hit at minute 8. By minute 15, intercepted radio traffic had shifted from tactical commands to individual soldiers calling for help, reporting their wounded, saying they could not move. By minute 22, the radio went silent. 18 vehicles destroyed or immobilized, 11 burning, 14 prisoners taken. Approximately 190 Russian soldiers killed, wounded, or incapacitated, including the column commander, deputy commander, and an estimated 8 to 12 additional officers and NCOs. The fuel, the artillery shells, the replacement weapons, the medical supplies, none of it reached the forward positions it was meant to supply. 2 Russian platoons at the front were left with critically low ammunition and insufficient vehicle fuel. The offensive push that column was meant to enable did not happen. This is how Ukraine is changing warfare, not by hitting where Russia is strongest, by hitting where Russia has to go. And when Russia begins to fear even the roads that look safe, the battlefield stops being a battlefield. It becomes a maze. And Ukraine is holding the map. War is not only measured in territory, it is measured in money. A burning tank is money. A destroyed convoy is money. A dead officer is months of training erased. Artillery shells that never reach the front line are an offensive strangled before it begins. In that 22-minute ambush, Russia lost an estimated $24 to $40 million of military value. Ukraine spent approximately $1 to $1.5 million, a battlefield return ratio of roughly 27 to 1. That number is why Washington, Brussels, Riyadh, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Moscow are all paying attention. Not because Ukraine has prettier weapons, but because Ukraine is proving a new principle. In modern warfare, the side that wins is the side that makes the other go bankrupt faster. Russia still fights by imperial instinct. More vehicles, more soldiers, more shells, more bodies. Ukraine fights by the instinct of a country that has been forced to innovate or die. No unlimited Patriot missiles, no unlimited artillery, no unlimited manpower. So Ukraine has to find ways to spend less and destroy more. FPV drones costing a few $100s each are striking armored vehicles worth hundreds of thousands. Interceptor drones priced around $2,000 are hunting Iranian-designed attack drones. Long-range strike drones are hitting oil refineries, fuel depots, export hubs, and logistics choke points deep inside Russia. Ukraine has developed 3 major capabilities that make this math work. The first is semi-autonomous drones. These aircraft can perform at least some targeting functions without a human operator, making them less vulnerable to electronic jamming and less dependent on personnel that Ukraine increasingly cannot spare. Production has ramped up significantly in recent months, and this is one of the primary reasons Russian forces are struggling to advance on the front lines. The second is long-range strike capacity. By the end of March, Ukraine had taken out roughly 40% of Russia's crude oil export capacity. In April, Russia was forced to cut production by approximately 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day, the sharpest monthly decline in 6 years. This is a direct financial attack on the engine that funds Moscow's war machine. The third is cost-effective interceptors. A single Patriot interceptor missile costs around $4 million. Using it to shoot down a Shahed drone that costs Iran roughly $7,000 is a painful equation. Ukraine has developed interceptor drones that cost as little as $2,000 per unit. They now account for approximately 70% of all drone intercepts around Ukrainian cities. This single development may be as strategically important as anything Ukraine is doing on the front line. This is not just technology, this is Ukraine's survival philosophy made physical. If Russia can use cheap weapons to force Ukraine to fire expensive ones, Russia wins through exhaustion. If Ukraine can use even cheaper weapons to defeat Russia's cheap weapons, Ukraine reverses the equation entirely. That is why the ambush of 18 vehicles matters beyond the number 18. It demonstrates a repeatable model. Cheap intelligence, cheap drones, cheap mines, precise artillery, expensive outcome for Russia. One Russian formation turned to burning steel. One planned offensive was delayed 5 to 10 days. One logistics corridor is locked. One Russian commander who will hesitate the next time he looks at a road. And in warfare, hesitation is also a casualty. Putin can send more soldiers into Ukraine, but he cannot print experienced commanders. He cannot manufacture modern tanks faster than Ukraine is destroying them. He cannot manufacture trust in a military system where the silence above a road might be the sound of a trap closing. Ukraine is turning warfare into a bloody balance sheet. One side burns $40 million, the other spends $1.5 million. One side sends a convoy, the other sends 60 drones. One side calls that a supply run, the other calls it an opportunity. And this is not only happening at the front, it is burning its way deep into Russia itself. A regime like Putin's does not only need an army, it needs a story, the story that Russia is winning, the story that Ukraine is about to collapse, the story that the West will eventually grow tired. The story is that Russian citizens just need to hold on a little longer and victory will come. But when oil refineries explode, when fuel oil coats the roads, when black smoke stretches 300 kilometers across the sky, when businesses hang for rent signs on empty storefronts, when soldiers' wives kneel before cameras, begging Putin to let their wounded husbands come home, the story begins to crack. A regime can survive battlefield losses. It struggles to survive repeated humiliation recorded on the phones of its own citizens. Picture someone sitting in a garage in Ohio, Texas, or Pennsylvania watching the news. Moscow is announcing that Russia is winning. But on the same screen, there is video of Russian civilians standing under skies filled with black smoke fuel oil pooling on roads beneath their feet, a local official telling everyone that everything is under control while the refinery behind him burns. That is not propaganda. That is a war invoice arriving at the civilian address. Russia once tried to weaponize winter against Ukraine, striking power plants, heating infrastructure, civilian utilities. The calculation was that cold and darkness would break Ukrainian will. Instead, Ukraine took that logic and reversed it. Now, Ukrainian long-range drones are striking the infrastructure that feeds Russia's war economy, oil terminals, refineries, logistics hubs, and the confidence that Russian soil is a sanctuary. The contradiction is becoming impossible to manage. The Kremlin says everything is under control. Russians post videos of chaos. The Kremlin says air defenses are strong. Russians ask where the air defenses were. The Kremlin says the economy is stable. Entrepreneurs walk the camera past empty storefront after empty storefront for rent, closed for rent in cities across Russia. The Kremlin says soldiers are cared for. Wives of wounded men describe husbands who spent 2.5 months lying underground learning to walk again, whose injuries were never officially documented, who were denied leave and sent back to assault Ukrainian positions. And underneath all of it, a detail that crystallizes everything: allegations of embezzlement of 18 million rubles from military budget funds at a facility literally named Patriot Park, surfacing at exactly the moment Russian civilians are asking why their air defenses failed to protect them. The logic is brutal. Ukraine does not need to destroy Russia's entire defense architecture from the outside. Part of that architecture has already been hollowed out from the inside by corruption, by dishonesty, by a system where defense contracts become envelopes of cash and wounded soldiers become inconvenient paperwork. When money meant for air defense becomes a bribe, every Ukrainian drone carries more than explosives. It carries proof. Proof that the Russian state is strong on television and hollow at the foundation. Even Russia's own propagandists are beginning to fray. On Russian federal television, commentators who have spent 4 years insisting Ukraine is on the verge of collapse are now quietly contradicting themselves. Hosts who built careers on announcing imminent Ukrainian defeat are watching their own rhetoric curdle. The talking point that Western support would dry up has become the talking point that Western support is accelerating. Statements about Ukraine running out of money are being replaced awkwardly, with statements about Europe preparing a 90 billion euro loan package. The machine is still running, but it is tiring. Here is where everything converges. While Russia struggles to maintain the old story, Ukraine is writing a new one. Not please save us, but we have technology the world needs. In the aftermath of the Iran war, nations across the globe began reassessing the cost of Western standard defense. Patriot missiles are extremely capable. They are also extraordinarily expensive per intercept, and the United States produces only a few hundred per year. Against a Shahed drone that costs a few $1,000s, a $4 million intercept is not a defense strategy. It is a path to bankruptcy. Ukraine is the only country currently mass-producing battle-tested, cost-effective alternatives. Gulf nations have taken notice. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE have signed security partnerships with Kyiv that are widely understood to involve cooperation on drone manufacturing. Germany and Ukraine have announced a major new defense package. Denmark, Finland, Latvia, and Italy are in various stages of joint ventures with Ukrainian defense firms. This is the full inversion. Russia entered this war intending to make Ukraine a lesson for the world, a demonstration of what happens to smaller nations that defy Moscow. Instead, Ukraine is making itself the school. Every Russian convoy was destroyed. Every oil facility struck. Every cheap drone that intercepts a cheap Russian drone. Every new defense contract is signed in Kyiv. All of it says the same thing. Ukraine is not just surviving. Ukraine is selling the world the formula for survival in the 21st century. Putin entered this war believing that time was on Russia's side. He believed Russia had more soldiers, more artillery, more oil, more patience. But modern warfare does not reward the side that absorbs punishment the longest. It rewards the side that learns fastest. And Ukraine is learning faster than Russia. A 4-kilometer corridor in eastern Ukraine proved it. Russia saw a quiet road. Ukraine saw a box. Russia heard silence in the sky. Ukraine heard a trap closing. 22 minutes later, 18 Russian vehicles were smoldering steel. 190 soldiers were out of the fight, and an offensive push died before it was born. But that was only one scene. The larger picture is more dangerous for Moscow. Ukraine is stabilizing its finances through Europe's 90 billion euro commitment. Ukraine is using drones to strike logistics, oil revenue, and the psychological sense of safety inside Russia itself. Ukraine is converting cheap technology into catastrophically expensive Russian losses, and Ukraine is completing its transformation from aid recipient to global security partner, a country that other nations now need to learn from, not merely support. This is what Putin did not calculate. He believed war would make Ukraine smaller. Instead, war has made Ukraine the most important military laboratory on the planet. And if Moscow still believes that every quiet road is a safe road, then the question is not whether another Russian column will drive into a trap. The question is how many corridors Ukraine has already prepared.